today my guest is Nelson Dellis, who is, and you're going to provide more details, but you are an experienced, or put it this way, an expert on memory.
Yes.
And you have also expressed an interest in or you've talked about the importance of language learning, and you yourself learned Dutch. So I want to explore memory and language learning because that's of great interest to the people who follow me.
Of course.
Could you begin perhaps by introducing yourself?
Yeah. So thank you for having me on your channel here. So I actually grew up speaking French mostly with my parents. They're from Belgium, French area. And so language has always been kind of important in my life. Obviously, I speak perfect English. It's my main language now and has been for the last probably 30-ish years. But my mother's side was Dutch and Flemish, and I always want to kind of explore that, but I never gave myself the chance. That's one side of the story. My memory journey started about 10 years ago when my grandmother passed away from Alzheimer's, and it kind of inspired me to start investigating what it meant to have a healthy brain and if there were techniques or any strategies I could learn to train my own memory to be better. Lo and behold, I found some and worked on it a lot, and it led me to win the U.S. Memory Championship a number of times and kind of make memory something that I now teach people.
Very interesting. When you mentioned memory, I remember once I was in Slovakia.
Okay.
I was holidaying there with my son and his family. They live in London, England. And we had a member of LingQ who lived nearby. We were in the mountains, but we met in the smaller town. And he had some trick that I can't remember, but he wrote a bunch of numbers out on a piece of paper and then did something, and he would remember which number was where on the piece of paper.
Sure. Yeah.
And of course, and we were just amazed at how he did this, but and something that you just couldn't do if you didn't have some trick for
strategy.
Doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that's often, I mean, we don't do that trick in particular, but I know how we would have done that. And then these competitions were tested on how many numbers you can remember, how many playing cards, poetry, lists of words, things like that. So it is it looks like a feat of memory, like somebody is out of this world, but it's trainable.
So is there a simple explanation, a sort of a summary of sort of these techniques? What is it about these techniques? How do they work? How does a person train to be able to do these things?
Sure. So I'd like to break it down into kind of 3 basic steps. And this is how I approach basically anything that I memorize, most things that I memorize. First thing is to think of a picture. So whatever I'm trying to memorize, I try to kind of strip away the foreignness of it and make it familiar to me. Because most things that you're learning, it's something you've never seen before. That's why it's difficult to learn. If it was easy to learn or something familiar, it probably would stick better.
Right.
So my goal is to kind of trick my brain into thinking it's something familiar. So that usually is in the form of some type of association or some kind of system that I've developed to translate complicated information into reliable, memorable pictures. We remember pictures better. So that's the first step. The second step is, how do I organize those pictures or photographs in my mind? And the most commonly used technique in memory competitions, at least, is something called a memory palace, where you imagine a physical space in your mind and you place those pictures along a route through there. And the idea is that we remember places very well as well. So why not use them to remember the order of things of those pictures? And it's not the only way to do it, but basically it's some kind of strategy to store information. The second step, how to store that information in a easily retrievable way. And then the final step is review. So if you want to keep things for long term, you have to review it. Now that doesn't ever sound very fun, but what's nice about steps 1 and 2 is that the review can actually become a little more enjoyable if you treat it that way. And then it's not so tedious as studying a book. You know, you kind of explore these crazy images in your mind.
So then, how were you able to apply this to learning Dutch? Now, you said your parents were from the Dutch or Flemish-speaking part of Belgium, so you would have heard Dutch, presumably, as a child. I don't know at what age you came to the United States, but you would have had some exposure to Dutch.
Yeah, so let me talk about that. So actually,
Yeah.
my dad speaks French. That's it. He's
Okay.
French Belgian. He knows absolutely nothing about Dutch,
Right.
Flemish, and he actually grew up mostly in France. So
Okay.
he's francophone, right?
Okay.
And then my mother is completely Dutch. She
Right.
sounds Dutch. She has that accent, but she speaks French.
Right.
And that's what they spoke together when I grew up. So we
Right.
always heard French around the house.
Right.
Hence why we spoke French. We actually lived there for a while too.
Right.
Belgian, the Flemish, I would really only hear that when she was on the phone, maybe with her sister.
Right.
But you're right. Of course I heard it. There's certain little phrases she says that I can repeat, but I never knew the meaning. I just said them.
Right.
But for a long time, it just felt like a very foreign, kind of hard language to grasp. So that was the start of my exposure to the language. And I'm 36. So
Right.
34, 35, I started thinking about maybe trying to learn it. And in a way to get closer to my mother, right? To be able to speak with her, to kind
Sure
of
enough.
that side of my family.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how did I tie that to my memory techniques? That was kind of the goal, right? To figure that out, or to attempt it and see how it went. One of the things I get told or asked of all the time is, you must be amazing with languages because of your memory, or do you ever use your memory to learn a language, right? And that question is kind of insane, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think anyone learns a language with memory alone.
Right.
And I'm totally aware of that. And I was aware of that. But I did believe that my memory would serve as a great help in kind of advancing me in certain areas.
Mm-hmm.
So I began kind of exploring what that would look like. And I thought to myself, well, because I can memorize words pretty fast, why not try and tackle a large set of vocabulary to start with? So I have some kind of base to build on, right? And then from there, I can maybe explore other kind of avenues of traditional language learning or different methods that aren't so memory based, but at least I would have a foundation. And that's kind of how the process started.
And so what did you find? Did you find that the memory techniques were helpful?
Yeah. So one of the things I think that's been tough for me and probably a lot of people who want to learn a language is just getting started, right? For years, I've been saying, oh, I can learn a language.
Right.
I have to apply my memory and put the work in. But that's easier said than done. And, you buy the books, you pay for the courses or whatever, you have a tutor lined up, and then, one thing leads to another, you're not doing any of the work, right?
Right.
You got to do the work. And I think a big part of my problem is I needed something simple that would get me started, that would kind of play on what I enjoy, which is the memory side of thing. Maybe not everybody likes that, but for me, I enjoy sitting down and coming up with these fun associations, a lot of them really quickly. And so I use this app called Drops that presents a lot of vocabulary in a fun, kind of aesthetically pleasing way. And it's very minimal at first, right? You don't have to kind of commit a lot to start. And that's what I needed. And I found myself kind of always going back to it, learning a bunch of words every day. And my goal was to learn about 2,000 words in 90 days. And I used the app to do that just because it helped kind of organize the different kind of categories, and it helped me review as well. Right. So yeah, after the 90 days, I believe I was successful. I had my mother test me and, quiz me on words, and I was able to nail, 90% of them. Right. With some, I'd need a little review, but I'd get them. And then from then, obviously I wasn't fluent at all. But I would say that I felt more confident at that point. And I had built so much, kind of consistency at that point that it was very easy to kind of move on to the next step, and really work on the language and the speaking and the reading and all that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, obviously, a major factor in language learning is, as I always say, it's the motivation of the learner and the amount of time that they're willing to put in. Yeah, there is this third element that I sometimes talk about, which is the ability to notice, but that develops naturally. If you spend a lot of time with a language, you start to notice more and more things in the language. Yeah, so it's not, you're not deliberately, I'm going to learn how to notice, but if you are motivated and if you spend the time, things that at first you don't notice in the language, they start to become clearer, certain words, certain structures. And what I have found is that, so first of all, to get started in a language, as I've said, I go to these mini stories that we have at LingQ.
Right.
And based on, and in particular, the last few languages that I've started to learn, I've relied entirely on the mini stories. That was for Greek, for Persian, for Arabic, and for Turkish. Mm-hmm. And typically after 3 months, just through repetitive listening to the mini stories, I will achieve 3,000-4,000 words. Now, the thing is, in languages, the very high frequency words, of course, they reappear very frequently because they're high frequency, but the frequency drops off very quickly. So if you say I'm going to learn 1,000 words, that to me is like doable. Okay.
Yeah.
Through a memory system, through the mini stories. When I was learning 1,000 characters of Chinese, I had a very primitive spaced repetition system. This is 50 years ago that I did. So a finite number of things, words, whatever it might be, I think is very definitely amenable to some clever memory system. So the issues I have with that as a sort of an approach to language learning, issues are that if you like doing that, that's great. If people like studying grammar, that's great. So if that motivates you, that's great. But if it doesn't motivate you, then the one big factor, motivation, is now negative. Now, mind you, not everybody likes to listen to the stories 20, 30, 40 times the way I do. So everyone has to find that thing that motivates them, that's enjoyable or challenging, so that they continue doing it, so they put in the time. And so you can get to that first few thousand words with either a memory system or mini stories or whatever. But now you have to, in order to be really fluent, and they talk about the European framework of reference, or call it advanced intermediate, B2, comfortable. You speak with mistakes, but you can sit in there and talk about a wide variety of subjects, maybe even follow a movie. And to get to that level, you need an awful lot of words. It's not 1,000. And it's probably closer to 20 or 30,000 based on my experience. And the frequency drops off so quickly that once you got the first 1,000 or 2,000 words, thereafter you're chasing words that might appear in a book 5 times.
Sure.
And yet you need them because those are key to being able to participate, because the native speaker has 40,000 words, 50,000 words, and he's going to, or she is going to use these in conversation. You don't have to be able to use them, but you have to be able to understand what they're saying. So the question I have is, so a memory system can be a really good, for people who are good at it, I think that could, like I'm struggling with my Persian. I see the same word over and over again. I can never remember what it means. If I had a memory system, perhaps I could nail those few words. But it's still only that very first part of the journey. Yeah. So how do you apply the memory system to 30,000 words?
Yeah. No, it's a great point you bring up. And by no means am I saying that the only way to learn a language, or the best way, is the way I approached it. I was definitely pulling on the way that made sense to me. And it was definitely a motivational thing for me. I enjoyed that. One thing I will say, though, is, I don't think you necessarily have to be good at memory techniques to enjoy them. I always kind of pitch what I teach as, memory techniques can be enjoyable to everyone. Mm-hmm. I think it's a really enjoyable experience. It's fun. It's addicting if you know how to do it right, with a bit of instruction and learning how to do it. So I believe everybody can kind of get to that point. But you're right. Maybe the idea of memorizing 1,000 words or 2,000 words in a few days or a month or whatever you aim for, just no matter how interesting memory techniques is, maybe that doesn't sound like your cup of tea. That's fine.
I think the difficulty is, so there's two. One is that, is it going to work in the long run? And even if it doesn't, if it gets you started in the language, it's a good thing. I'm not saying that it's a great thing to do. The problem I've always had with memory techniques or mnemonics or whatever you want to call them, is whatever you're doing, whether you're on Drops or LingQ or whatever, you have to believe in the system.
Yeah.
So you have to invest the time. You got to say, it's worth my while to develop these language learning techniques. I think it's good. I want to spend the time because, when I'm listening to a story, at least the language is flowing into my brain. I enjoy it. I'm listening. There's the music of the language, and I'm happy doing that. And I know from experience that it works. So then I said, no, that's good, but there's a more efficient way. And that's to invest this time in Nelson's learning techniques. So I have to believe, because if I don't believe it, I'm not going to really put the effort into it. So it's like, I'm now going to invest upfront in something that Nelson says is going to help me. So how do you overcome that sort of skepticism? You know, I've seen these references to the sort of Roman house or Roman palace or whatever it was, you know, and I've always, just my nature, I said, I'm just reluctant to invest the time in that. And so how do you overcome that reluctance? Or in fact, do you find much reluctance? Are people very happy to jump in there and learn these techniques?
I think it's kind of a mixed bag. And maybe some of it comes from not quite understanding. Like, I know when you're talking about this Roman room method, that sounds like a lot of extra work, a big investment to kind of set this up. But really, my approach was, I actually didn't use any memory palaces at all, or Roman rooms, which they require a lot of setup. Because my idea is, you know, I want to be able to speak this and access the information pretty quickly. I don't want to have to sit there, look up the specific words and their meanings. I want it to be as easy to come out as possible. And so a lot of the stuff I did was essentially just pure association. So, and connecting, instead of connecting it to a memory palace, connecting each word to each other, each image to each other, let's say. So a lot of the process was very quick. You know, I'd see a word in target language, know the meaning, and then kind of come up with pictures for both and then anchor them together. So whether I see one or the other, I can hopefully remember the connection it made. In terms of kind of convincing someone that this is the method to do, I'm going to go back to the fact that it's fun and addicting to know or recognize words, right? To start.
Yes.
I feel like there's a good feeling when you say, I know this word, and I know all these words, all the colors, all the months, all these verbs, whatever.
Right.
And I think that builds on itself. And I think there's a lot of importance to getting started with something that kind of fuels you going forward, right? Makes you consistent in this language learning process. Again, I don't know if I would just say, hey, everybody out there has to learn X amount of words.
But everyone is interested in techniques that are going to help them learn more quickly.
Of course. Yeah. And that's I think what feels good is the maybe it's a false quite sense of being, you know, you're approaching fluency, but there is progress being made, right? If you know 1,000 words, you know 1,000 words.
Exactly. Now, just to sort of explore a couple of different situations. When I was learning Chinese characters, and I used, as I say, a spaced repetition system, but a manual one that I had worked out. Okay. And so you're learning 1,000 characters. I mean, you're almost learning items on their own because these characters are so unrelated to anything. So you're just learning objects, okay? Sure. But when I learn words, so if I'm learning words in a related language, which is the case with, say, Dutch, because it's so many words are identifiable from English. Or even from French, and French to English. And there's lots of stuff German there that you can, or German, that you can identify. So you've got the word, which you connect to the word in the language you know. You may even get a freebie because it looks like a word in a language you know. Slightly different meaning. So there's an association. You start to see forms of that word. So now you've got additional associations. So there are a lot of associations that are there. Yeah. And I guess I rely on those associations when I'm learning. Associations with words that are often used with that word. So you know that that's used together with something else. But the interesting thing is things like numbers and colors, which I know, I mean, if I see a word for red, I know the color red or blue or green. I find those very difficult to remember. If I come across a word in Persian for situation, condition, any of those words, which have more meaning. I mean, I find those easier to remember. Those are easy. Those grab me. Those have resonance. It's like, is that green? Is it red? Is it white? I can't remember. Now, maybe there are certain kinds of vocabulary that we should have a deliberate sort of memory technique approach to, because they're intrinsically, like, I find that numbers and colors are so hardwired in our own language that they're difficult to learn in another language. Or maybe that's my theory, but maybe that's not. But I always find them difficult. When people start, well, today, chapter 3, we're going to do the parts of the body, or we're going to do, the names of all our relatives or the colors. I find those things impossible to remember. But verbs, go, come, need, give, take, those things are easy to remember. First of all, they show up very often. Yeah. And they're easier to remember just by being in some kind of meaningful context, like a little story. Whereas things like colors, they kind of stand on their own in a way.
Yeah, they're these kind of islands. I agree with you, because, and I think the reason is because a lot of verbs, for example, and these kind of more abstract terms, we have to almost create the way we know what they mean in our target or in our native language is. It's hard to say, okay, that is the situation. There's that thing right there, right? You have to kind of describe, a situation, can be, here's an example, or we have, analogies or metaphors or something. And I think all of that is tagged with emotion and the feelings that go with it, which is so much more memorable than saying green, blue. Yeah. And that's exactly why those are more complicated. So I don't know where you were leading with that question, but
so I'm saying, so the whole issue is, as you're investing time in your language learning, how much time you can't spend all your time. Let's take extreme case, learning words on their own, because then you're missing, you're not listening, you're not reading, you're not training the brain in the patterns and the structures and the sound and the feel of the new language. Yep. However, it's inefficient to the extent that you keep on forgetting the same words. So if you were able to zoom in on some vocabulary and really grab a hold of those words, that would help you. So the question is, how much time do you spend on sort of more conventional listening and reading, imbibing the language, getting used to the language activities? How much time should you spend on the more targeted, memory technique to grab words and hold them and have them? And I guess a related question is, you've used your memory technique to learn a word. If you don't see that word in any kind of a context for a certain amount of time, aren't you going to lose it anyway?
Yeah, no, you're perfectly right. And here's the follow-up to my challenge I made for myself for 90 days to learn those words. Is after that, I didn't do any more of that. It was all what you're talking about. Right. I worked with the tutor, and we met to speak. We had a few books that we were kind of doing exercises with. I was studying, my grammar and using examples, listening to movies, cartoons, all those things, trying to be as facing this language as possible. Right. And to be honest, in terms of memory techniques, where I sat down and say like, I need a memory technique for that, I'd say it went from 100% in those first, few weeks of learning words to maybe 5 to 10%. Right. So I definitely, I think it has its place for certain things. And even the 5-10% that I'm talking about, I would maybe use if there was like some conjugation of a verb that just wouldn't stick, I wouldn't force all these verbs in my head with memory techniques. I actually would just use them for certain things that I kept bumping into, or things I kept saying wrong, or the way I pronounce things, to try to remember some of those things. Because I totally recognize, and I totally agree with you that I think you have to be, these words need to be used. You need to hear them, you need to see them, you need to feel them. If not, they're just going to be, eventually they're going to fade away.
Certainly the use of memory techniques is big in language learning. You have spaced repetition systems, for example, which is a different approach. It's not an association. It's more some kind of algorithm of
over time,
how frequently you need to see them. And I think these things are very useful, especially at the beginning. And also, as you mentioned, declensions, conjugations, which are so difficult. But again, you don't need to necessarily theoretically know what the conjugation is. Like I often mention the example in English, most people know that the third person singular in the present tense takes S. He goes, he comes. Yeah. However, people regularly say he come, he go. Yeah. So it's not that they don't remember or that they don't know, but they can't produce it in the middle of a conversation. So again, knowing it, However, if you know it, you're more likely perhaps eventually to be able to produce it. If you talk about, verb endings in French or in, I don't know Dutch, but, declensions or whatever. So, yeah, I think there's a real place for memory techniques, whether it be, the kind of memory techniques that you are an expert in, or spaced repetition systems, but it should be in a very sort of deliberate, well-defined area that it shouldn't take away too much time from. And I think it's particularly important in the beginning to get a toehold, because everything is just noise, like all these words that mean nothing. So then you get yourself a toehold, but then we don't want to spend too much time on that at the expense of more general exposure to the language. And it also depends on what people like to do, of course.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think you're making some great points, and I agree with a lot of them. Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, this is very interesting, and it's going to be interesting. So, if people want to learn more about your memory techniques, what should they do?
Well, I think the best place to start might be to go to my YouTube channel. I have a bunch of videos. Some are on what I've been doing with Dutch, and then some are just general memory techniques. Mm-hmm. You just search my name there, Nelson Dellis. And then my website, people can go there. It's nelsondellis.com and ask me questions. Send me an email.
Okay. Well, this is very interesting. And I'm sure many of the people who follow my channel here will be very, very interested.
Hey, I have a quick question for you.
Yes, sir.
So on I always pronounced it LingQ, but I guess
that's fine. We get both. We're happy. As long as people join, we're happy.
Yeah, sure. I played around with it. I find it fascinating. I want to maybe try it for a different language goal of mine. But does it have Swahili or no?
No.
Okay. Right.
We have, in order to launch a new language, we say we want a minimum of X amount of content.
Yeah.
Because if there's no content there and someone joins for the purpose of learning Swahili and there's one story there, then we're misleading them. So we have to have a minimum of a certain amount of content. And we have had these mini stories because it's easy enough. We say, okay, we get Swahili. Someone has to, and occasionally we'll subsidize it, translate them into Swahili, record them in Swahili, audio with text. If we have 60 stories in Swahili, we will launch Swahili. I think someone is working on Swahili. So it may be that we will get Swahili. Okay. But at the present time, we don't have Swahili. We have Dutch.
Yeah, no, I've played around with it. I didn't want to interfere or cross kind of methods, but I was fascinated by the whole approach. I think it's...
No, we're continuously adding languages, and we're working on improving it. And it's an ongoing project. It's like a permanent project.
Sure, yeah. When are you finished? Yeah,
Never. Okay, well, I think that's going to be interesting. Thank you very much. And maybe look forward to talking again. And I will let you know when we get Swahili launched.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
It's been a pleasure, Steve. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.